So the conference organizers asked me to talk about design, and hopefully you guys will find it very interesting. Before we get started, just a little background on what you need to know. It's been covered in the previous session, but essentially this is worth your time, right? The market overview here should be compelling to everybody. Globally, we're looking at a $391 billion dollar industry. That includes offline as well as online. I do think at some point you're going to see games that we create on casino floors. So I would say that there's an immense opportunity there. Currently, the online component of it is about 10% of the offline component of it. But given the way things work in the world and what the internet does to traditional land-based businesses, I expect that percentage to grow over time. If you can see, basically online gambling, there's no comparison to social gambling in terms of revenue. The only place where it's flipped is in America, where most of the activity is illicit today. Yeah, I'll let people take their pictures. In terms of selected jurisdictions, just again, it's a really immense opportunity. The UK is about a $4 billion market. Philippines is about a $2 billion market. That's domestic business. In the US, they're just picking up. I personally think that the results out of New Jersey are good, considering all of the obstacles that they've had to face. I think last month there was $11.5 million of activity. And look, for them launching in November with going from 0 to that, with all of the payment problems, I think is actually very encouraging. You're now seeing other states pick up the cause. There's been a lot of talk about California, Massachusetts, a bunch of other places that are getting into the action. So I think if you guys are thinking about doing real money stuff, this is the perfect time. How do we work? What we do is we kind of handle all the regulated elements, and then we allow people like yourselves to really kind of be the creative engine here. I will talk about some of the creative stuff in the design, because we also are creating our own content primarily to really push the envelope in terms of what is accepted at casinos and in the public marketplace. So we kind of act much more like a traditional publisher, but in the real money space. So how can you guys benefit? The first thing is look, you got to have a strategic plan for real money gambling. You cannot just kind of say like, oh, I'm going to make a real money gambling game today. You should figure out a strategy, right? And you either need to go get licensed yourself, find a publisher that is licensed, like somebody like an 888 or like a big guy, or find a technology partner that's licensed, and that would be somebody like us. You're looking at 2 to 3 year terms, so that's pretty much what everybody's familiar with in terms of a standard publishing agreement. You have to design and build these games with these regulations in mind, and determine what kind of game you want to make. Traditionally, we've seen casino games, poker games, parimutuel games, bingo games, but the ones in red are the categories that I'd like this audience to consider. I think that there's a tremendous opportunity to create action games, board games, racing games, puzzle games, physics games, all of those types of games, and add gambling mechanics to them. And I want everybody here to try to join me in calling this kind of category casual casino, right? So I put Darth Vader up there. It's my own little Andy Kaufman moment, because basically no one likes Darth Vader. So, but anyway, hopefully you get past that and think about casual casino. And I really do think there's a big opportunity. So why bother with casual casino at all, right? Real money games are making a lot of money. Well, it's really competitive. And the audience, when you look at kind of the audience from a demographic standpoint, it's still the same mainstream casino gamer. So if you're going to try to compete with the really big players out there, I would say that's probably not the right strategy, right? I mean, you're not going to beat someone like an IGT at their core competency, which is slots, right? They do really well at that, and they do that for a reason, because they've been doing it for a very, very, very long time. Fortunately for you, those slot machines that they design, both online and offline, are very, very, very targeted experiences for that particular user. That's the only particular user that they know how to really monetize well, right? And here's where you guys come in. You guys know how to monetize these people really well, right? And I got to tell you, the IGTs of the world have no clue how to monetize this demographic. And so when I talk about casual casino, I'm asking everybody in this room to consider looking at match 3 games, arcade games, shooter games, racer games, and trying to add gambling mechanics to them. Because, believe it or not, well, the established players in the casino world know that their demographic is older and they're not attracting new audiences. And so in order for that business to grow, they're going to need people like you and me and the audiences that we know how to provide entertainment experiences for. So my presentation is about design. So let's talk about design. The first thing, before we get into the specifics of it, I want to talk about this one kind of phrase, terminology called simulacrum, right? And so simulacrum is this kind of fancy word for something that is a copy of something, right? And at first, it referred to these statues of gods, and it picked up a negative connotation because while it's a very pretty statue, it's not a god, right? It's lesser than the original. Examples of simulacrum are the replicants in Blade Runner, right? They're really powerful, really cool, not quite human, a little disturbing, right? So, but you have also holograms that are also super cool, but they don't fly, you can't sit in them. So they're copies, right? Some people think simulacrum is good, right? So I was very lucky to take my family to this island that Disney owns. It's called Castaway Cay. In many aspects, it's much better than any other island in the Bahamas, right? But it is 100% artificial. It is a designed experience, right? So it is a copy of what the Bahamas should be, and some people think it's a better copy, all right? But I guess I'm in the minority because I didn't really like it that much because I just saw that it was a designed experience, right? They planted trees everywhere. They raked the sand everywhere. It was a very awesome experience. So as Vincennes would probably say, okay, seriously, what the fuck? What's your point? So my point is, the current gambling experiences are derivative from the physical experiences. And so I would say that it is possible, right? And it's profitable to extend these experiences to the digital world. But I would say you're only going to get the same demographic. The people that like to spin slots in the casinos, like to play craps in casinos, if you digitalize that, you're going to get the exact same audience. What I would ask this audience to consider is that with a new medium, new entertainment experiences become possible, right? Ones that are organic to the medium itself, right? And so we're talking about the internet, mobile, PCs, tablets, right? So all that stuff that doesn't really have a physical component. So when you're designing these types of games, the first thing you got to look at is the core game mechanic. And look, I've designed games before, right, in free-to-play area as well as gambling now. And in terms of, I think this is actually the biggest kind of source of tension between designing for a traditional IAP game and a casino game. In normal games, right, discovery is a part of the entertainment process. What does this item do? What does this do? How does this boss work, right? How do I figure out this level? It must be familiar, but there's got to be a lot of new elements to capture the audience's attention. In gambling, traditionally, discovery is really scary, right? There are companies that design physical games all the time. They last on the casino floor for about a year, and then they rip them out because everybody goes back to poker, because they understand poker. So what I would say is that be creative, but you got to understand that you got to keep the gambling mechanics simple, and you got to communicate the wager sequence clearly and effectively when you're designing these things. And I'll go into what I consider a wager sequence later on the deck. In terms of the monetization vehicle, right? Traditionally, you're talking about whether or not to do a paid app, IAP, advertising. Then you got to think about the free audience, paid audience, and how do you convert them. For gambling, there's really none of that. These guys deposit. They download the game, they deposit. Then you have to figure out what kind of denomination you want to use. What do you want the rate of wagering to be? What do you want the RTP, the return to player, to be? How volatile do you want that return to player to be? Those are the things that you need to consider when you're talking about a real money game versus kind of a traditional casual game. You also have to think about whether or not you provide a free user experience in a gambling game, and what that free experience is supposed to do. Is it just to familiarize the audience with the game, right? We remember gambling is scary, so is it really just to kind of get them to understand the rules of the game and then convert them into paying? Or are you going to want to offer a social component alongside the gambling component? But be aware that if you do that, the math should be identical in terms of the gambling portion of the game. And then you need to figure out what the zero balance is, right? So you're wagering, your wallet now is out of money. There's an important consideration there in terms of kind of converting that user. So you have to think about that from a design perspective. So sometimes familiarity is a good thing, right? In terms of cash management, this is largely derivative of what you see in a lot of casinos today, right? You have some important functions here, and some are regulatorily required. You need a timestamp, believe it or not, so you always need to tell people what time it is. Don't ask me why. There's a denomination, right? You need to tell people what their denomination is, how many credits they have, what they're betting, what they've won. So I think this is actually a really, really important sequence, the wagering sequence. And there's a lot of design implications here. So I think when we broke down the wagering sequence, we broke it down into 7 steps. The first step is that a player needs to choose the denomination: penny, quarter, nickel, $100, $1,000. Number 2, the player indicates an intent to wager. So typically, in most casino games today, you press spin or you roll or something like that. But I'll ask you to consider whether or not that's actually the right thing to do. Number 3, once that person indicates that they want to wager, you transfer money off of a meter and it goes to a regulated entity, which is the online casino. Number 4, the result of the wager is determined by the casino. 5, you show the player that some random thing, right? In slot machines, they're wheels, that some gambling thing has happened. And then 6, you show them the result. And then 7, you give them money back if they've won. So in terms of design, I would say, look, these steps are generally sequential, but each step can vary greatly in terms of timing and presentation. And I'll go into a couple examples. In terms of the player choosing the denomination, typically, you just kind of select it from a drop-down list. So I would say, why do that? Why don't you make it interactive? Why don't you make that a fun part of it? Maybe you have to achieve goals in the game to unlock greater denoms or lesser denoms. What if the denomination itself was determined by some sort of gameplay events? So I would say, look, even though we have this wagering sequence, there are a lot of things within that wagering sequence that you can really do non-traditionally that I think would interest people that we all know how to, that we create games for. The next step, in terms of player indicates an intent to wager, why do you have to press the spin button? I think that's kind of lame, truthfully. What if you had to achieve game conditions to initiate a wager sequence? What if a wager condition was completely a random process in and of itself, right? I mean, I think you could just think about that and how many awesome kind of cool things that you could do there in terms of saying, oh, well, I might wager, I might not, and the timing of the wager, and depending on these certain game events. Flip it. What if certain game conditions kept you from making a wager, right? What if you had a timer and you had to do a bunch of things in the game before that timer ran out, before the wager's run, right? So again, just kind of playing with the notion that you can do a lot more than just kind of saying, like, I want to spin, or in the innovation now is spin automatically. So I think that there's more that you can do there. What if, and just kind of thinking outside the box, what if you indicated a wager by doing a geotag, or bumping somebody, or doing something completely different, right? I think all of that stuff is fair play. In terms of showing a wager animation, why do you need to mimic a physical gambling process? You know, I really started thinking about this when I started looking at the gambling math behind stuff, and there's these things called par sheets and slot machines, and they're mind-blowing. And the reason why they're mind-blowing is that they're physics experiments, right? They're literally like describing in math how these physical reels go around, which I think is antiquated, really. So think about, in terms of design, how would you communicate that a random event is occurring otherwise? I think as game developers, we know, right? I mean, we do a lot of random things in games. They're not regulated, but I think that you could if you put your mind to it. How would you communicate the random event, and for how long? I think that's really also important in terms of building up the anticipation. Do you want that randomization kind of animation? Do you want it to run really long? Do you want it to run short? What if it runs longer? Kind of if you think you're going to win, right? So if you get really short wins and get them out of the way, and then you build up a lot of excitement and then go, I actually lost, or something like that, right? But right now, what happens is that you have a fixed period of animation, these like slot reels run, and then you get your determination. And I think, again, as really creative game developers, we can do better than that. Do you have to show the same randomization event every time? What if you switched up, right? And let's say if you did this level, you would have a different animation, or if you did that level, you did a different animation, or if you choose a different character, you would have a different animation. I think as long as you can clearly communicate that a gambling event is occurring and a random process is happening, I think we can, again, be very creative about how we communicate that a wager is taking place, or the randomization is taking place. Finally, a player is shown the wager result. So I think, again, you could do some really non-traditional things here by conveying the result, but doing it in a non-traditional manner. What if you did it in a thematically appropriate abstraction? You could communicate that in many different ways depending on the genre of your game. Does the wager need to be in cash, or the results need to be in cash? What if you thought about other considerations? What if you decided to say, instead of winning money, you won premium digital goods, or you won other things worth of consideration? So gambling, right, the most accepted definition of gambling is that you have consideration in, you have a random event, and consideration out. Now, most people just take both ends of that consideration to be cash. But as you and I all know, right, there are a lot of other things that game players find valuable, right? So what happens if you actually give people back something that they would find a value that you can buy on your IEP store, but instead you won it through a gambling process? That would actually constitute consideration, but it's not cash. And because I was a publisher before, I know that players typically like digital good prizes rather than physical good prizes, right? I mean, we kind of all know that. So what happens if you said, look, okay, instead of giving you cash, I'll give you this opportunity to get this other digital good instead, or this other thing of value instead, that you can use, but has monetary value. It's just something to consider, but I think it's worth thinking about when you're doing design. In conclusion, I want to just kind of redo those 3 points, right? Simulacrum, right? So what's going on today, in my opinion, is that people are making physical or copies of physical gambling processes, which are okay. That's great business, but I think it is perhaps a little stifling in terms of creativity. The design for gambling needs to take in different design considerations, right? You have to think about the entertainment value, familiarity with the gambling process, monetization, and most importantly, regulatory concerns. So it's not like you can just kind of come up with a really great idea and just kind of do it. There are regulatory things here, so I hope you know that like all the things I was talking about in terms of that wager sequence, you still need to go through and work with regulators. You still need to prove to them that you're returning the same RTP, the math is static, all that stuff. But I'm saying that you can do a lot of stuff on the display and the user communication side, so that as long as you have the atomic unit of the gambling kind of mechanism, and that does not change, it's been our experience that the regulators are very, very interested in understanding these non-traditional presentation layers, right? And presentation layer is the euphemism for the entertainment game, right? So again, and so finally, within the wagering sequence, I think there's a lot of creative direction to be explored. There's so much there in those kind of 7 steps that can be not exploited, but really kind of noodled on and tried to figure out how to do things differently. And I hope I kind of discussed a couple of those with you today, or a few of those with you today. You can switch up denominations, you can switch up the animations, you can get people not to wager unless they complete certain game actions. And I think all of that's fair game. It's just that the gambling industry has been doing things so well for a certain period of time, but they've really only been doing it again for that target customer. And we all know, because we've designed games, that our audience, or that community, the community that we're looking at, really likes new concepts, new ideas, and I think that that would be something that would be attractive to them. So hopefully this sparked some ideas for you guys. I'm happy to talk about other design ideas as well. As you might be able to tell, I'm pretty excited about all of the new stuff that we're going to be able to do, because I think it's really something that this is an industry that hasn't experienced a lot of fundamental change. And I think what we want to do primarily at Gamblit is really be a bridge between the games industry and the gaming industry. And I think that that bridge is going to be essential, not just for games, but for gambling industries as well as for the well-being for those 2 industries. There is a lot of challenges, obviously, but I think we start kind of here, and we start thinking about how creatively we can attack that 21 to 35, 21 to 40-year-old demographic, which simply isn't interacting with the gambling content that's out there today. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, David. Now, I'm sure we have plenty of questions on design and the things that you can do. While you think about those, let me throw a difficult one to you, David. You know me. Now, you've mentioned that you're going to be a publisher also.
Yes.
How do you see any possible conflict of interest between publishing your own content and getting somebody else's content?
Well, yeah. Look, there's. I think it's a model that is pretty standard in the games industry, right? I mean, nobody says that Rovio is going to, like, they would love to have Rovio publish their games, right? Or Chilingo or something like that, right? So I think it's pretty acceptable that for publishers they have direct content and they also have third-party content. But I would, again, like to reiterate, the main purpose for our own content generation is to really iterate on those concepts that I've talked about in this presentation and pioneer those with the regulators, right? So that when I bring up some of those are examples that I've talked about with regulators. And so we've said, look, what if, so for one quick example, we had to create a game, and we said, look, we have a game now that uses a digital object that you win that may allow you to bet more. Is that permissible? And so we had to create a game and show them, and to our excitement, that mechanic was permissible. But in order to have that conversation, we have to create content. But what we do as a service is that we can talk to developers and say, hey, look, now you can throw off a digital good, right? You can put that back into the game, makes them do better in the game. It could drive a little bit more wagers. And now this process has been kind of approved. Go develop, do creative stuff.
Thanks, David. Thanks for that one. All right, next question from the audience.
Hello. All right. You've been talking about integrating gambling mechanics into regular games. Let's say if we have a match 3 or a physics game and we want to integrate gambling in it. I think in 2011 or 2012, I don't know if you're aware of the Compu Gacha.
Yeah,
that was happening in Japan, and it was banned.
Yeah.
Because maybe too hardcore for monetizing the kids. So I don't know if there are actual regulations or rules about implementing gambling mechanics into a casual game for kids.
Well, so first of all, you shouldn't make gambling games for kids, right?
Gambling games, but gambling mechanics. Yeah.
Oh, bummer.
The reason why Compu Gacha was disallowed in Japan because they just decided it was gambling. So whether or not I'm not going to comment on that, but I can tell you what we're doing is fully licensed, right? So my statement is that if Compu Gacha is gambling, it should be permissible with a gambling license, right? because what we're doing is we're enabling gambling, right? Yeah. So the fact that you have this random process you're spending, and that was kind of my design point about the consideration back not being in cash. CompuGotcha was about spending cash, right? Random thing, and then you got something of value that was not cash, right? And they said that's gambling. So again, I'm not going to comment on that, but I could say with the proper license, with the proper gambling license, you should be able to do it.
Just for the sake of clarification, because I've heard some questions to Jonathan before, I think it's important that everybody understands that both Bettable and Gambit only operate where real money gambling is licensed and legal.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right.
I think that's an important nuance, because sometimes, for all of us that are constantly talking about these topics, this is very clear, but for some outside developers, it might not. So right now, you basically are restricted to continental Europe, some parts of the US, any other geographies?
So in terms in legal online gambling?
Yes, of course.
Yeah, so New Jersey, Philippines,
yes,
United Kingdom,
yes,
Mexico,
Spain, Italy, France.
Spain, Italy, France with the right permits.
Correct.
So there's a lot, and look, it's our job to follow this stuff, not your guys' job. But I can tell you, just about everybody is looking into this in terms of the states in America, and there are almost everybody is looking at this at a national level in terms of online gambling, because what people have realized is that either you regulate it or it happens anyway, and it's better to regulate it so that you impose some controls. Singapore is a terrific example of this, right? Right now, you can most of the Singaporean activity is served by people licensed out of Gibraltar, Isle of Man, or Malta, right? And so what I hear is that that might be going away. But I think that's a good thing, because I think the Singaporean government will say, look, we want to regulate this, and I think that's actually a great thing.
Okay, I think we're going to wrap it up for this session. All right, we'll take one more.
That's good.
Just quick, do you have any case studies on companies that have used your design elements that you just presented today? That
Yes.
used them successfully in the gambling markets that you were talking about?
So we have internal studies. I mean, obviously this is very new, right? So we're trying to really push the envelope here. We have our own internal data. We're not ready to release that data. We're going to be launching in November. And so, we have a marketing plan and rollout plan, and we'll be releasing kind of engagement data, that kind of stuff, later on in the year.
So for both Bettable and Gambit, Casual Connects next year, we'll see the results of this rolling out.
Yes.
Third session is over. We have a few minutes break until
Thanks
the
again.
fourth one. And David, thanks again.